This video is part of a live online performance. A small cut has been made to remove audience participation instructions. So, why are we all here tonight, and what is it that's happening? The project was actually conceived back in the days when people could travel, with the idea in mind that it could relieve the burden of travel for disabled musicians in particular. We'd done a few gigs where we had to travel a long distance to take part in a very short rehearsal, and felt that actually, what if you could drop in from where you are and rehearse the gig, and possibly even patch in on the night and perform? This opens up the opportunity for performers to be anywhere and take part in all the fabulous things they'd perhaps been missing out on because of distance. I think we have all probably learned from the pandemic that the quality of music sharing online is not ideal, particularly if people are working in their own homes with home internet and domestic microphones, which has very much been the case. So the idea behind this project was to explore whether there was a better way of doing things, which didn't involve taking all that difficult and complicated audio and conveying it over the internet. What if we just sent MIDI? So, excuse me if this is common knowledge to some of you, but just to explain what I mean when I keep saying MIDI. Essentially, MIDI is a set of instructions for software to play music. It's a very small text instruction asking it to turn on a specific note and keep going until it's instructed to turn it off again. This data can travel over the internet much faster and without the large latency delay and loss of sound quality we're all becoming so familiar with. So, because Matthew, who you'll meet later, is playing an acoustic violin for this piece, we can most easily see the translation from audio into MIDI data through his instrument, as the electronic instruments already output in MIDI. I'm going to show you a quick video clip taken over Zoom, where you can really appreciate the problems of sending audio, particularly with instruments with such rich harmonics as a violin. I am incredibly grateful to Matthew to allow us to hear his recording with all the shortcomings of Zoom audio, as the result does not do him any favours, but it lets you all see the process in action. I promise he doesn't sound like that when you're in the room, and nor in the performance tonight. So, you'll be able to see the audio monitor coming in at the left-hand side and picking up Matthew's playing through the microphone. And on the right-hand side of the video, you will see the data that the computer is reading. Similar to when you use a tuning app, it measures the frequencies and volume of the notes and decides which notes it is, and then that's the data which is going to go over the internet.
It can also translate your speech into music.
It can be good fun when you're rehearsing with this process, as all the speech and laughter comes out as a piece of music too. And I'm sure we can do wonderful things with that in future projects. In this video, you can see the data coming into Time Warp, which is the software that's conveying the data to the internet. The actual sound of the violin is muted for the whole performance. It's this text data which comes through and plays the violin sound. In the next video, you'll see the performer view a bit more clearly. The notes are shown in two different colours to clearly show who's playing what. Matthew is going to play some notes just using the on-screen keyboard, and his notes are blue. When I play notes on my keyboard, and remember he's in Berlin when I'm in Edinburgh at this point, and my notes come through to him in green. Other colours are available, but we picked the blue and green. We play in turns, and then at the end we're both playing together despite the distance, and there's no sound in this video. If you could bear with me a moment, if you're not a technophile, I just want to touch on the underlying software a little bit. This is an example pathway for most players. I will explain it and then give the caption readers a moment to have a look at the image. At the top left, you will see the acoustic pathway. Matthew, on his violin, is playing into software called A2M, which converts the violin into MIDI. The output for this then goes into a loop MIDI port on Windows. It's a different path for Mac users, things I don't understand at all. From loop MIDI, it goes into the software we were just looking at, Time Warp Internet MIDI, which is where the connection is made between the two players. Now we go over to the right-hand side of the diagram, which is the receiving side. So my signal comes out from Time Warp in my loop MIDI as text. This text leaves loop MIDI and goes to Ableton, which knows how to make the instructions into music. The audio leaves Ableton via a web plugin called Audio Movers to have a feedback to the players so they can hear the whole performance as it plays on Leslie, the producer's laptop. Meanwhile, the audience feed comes from Ableton into the broadcast software, OBS, where Leslie adds the Zoom camera feed to the audio and sends it out to all of you, our lovely audience. I'll just let you have a look at that for a minute. The electronic pathway is almost identical, but they have an easier time of the input. On the bottom left side, you can see the instrument simply plugs into Time Warp because those instruments already produce MIDI. So that's enough of the technology part. We can finally talk music. The piece in the form you'll hear it tonight has been created entirely online and remotely through this online collaboration. There are a few recorded sections from our technical sessions alongside our live performance today. What I think we should do now is introduce you to my wonderful fellow performers. So I'm Clare Johnston, I'm in Edinburgh, Scotland, and I am playing an iPad with the Thumb Jam app, and the sound I'm making in the performance is a flute. So this is what I have. Ooh. And I just slide across the keys to make my sound. Okay, Sonia Alori, who sadly is unwell and not able to join us tonight, she would be in the Scottish Highlands, and she plays an Akai Ewi, E-W-I, an electronic wind instrument. It's much like an electric clarinet in appearance, and she will be making a clarinet sound for us today, recorded from rehearsal, and is represented by a still photo of a dark-haired lady with a traditional clarinet. Matthew Finnemore is a blonde gentleman. He's in Berlin.
Hi.
Amble Skews has reddish-brown shoulder-length hair, or did when I wrote this. She is in Dunfermline in Scotland. She is playing a MIDI controller and will be making a synth sound.
Hello.
And Leslie, who you can't see, is our producer, patching people in and out of the performance, setting up Zoom, and doing other amazing things behind the scenes for us. And she's here in Edinburgh too. And Chris Halpin, you're gonna like this, is a funky modern guy whose hair changes at least fortnightly. He is near Birmingham in England, and he will be playing Me Moo gloves and making a guitar sound. And I'll just let Chris briefly explain to us what those are.
Sound. In this case, I'm sending that MIDI data over the app that you just heard about, which for some reason, the name of which has escaped me. Internet MIDI, of course. So I'm sending my MIDI from my hands over the internet up to Scotland, where it's all happening. And I can play. I've got some sound here, so you can hear me play. So that's it. That's the Mimi gloves for you.
Thank you, Chris. There's also a backing track running throughout, and the purpose of the backing track is to minimize the issue of the latency or the delay of the audio from Ableton. The audio track is actually playing inside the MIDI software, and everyone receives that remotely to their own computer, and I think it will make more sense as we do it. So the piece we are performing tonight was actually born after a long few hours of banging our heads against the technology. And we just sat back, we reflected on what we'd learned, and decided to just jam together with a totally different piece of music, and it finally all worked. I invite you to enjoy this piece called Contemplation and Review. Thank you. And we're going to go over to Pete Sparks, who has been monitoring our question and feedback channel. Pete, do you have any questions for us?
Hi there. Hello there. Yeah, that was fantastic. Really, really enjoyed it. One of the questions is, does it feel like you're playing in a quartet? Because one of the things, obviously, you're all in the same, you're all sort of sharing the same time, but does it sort of, do you get a sense you're playing together in this piece? So that's the first question.
From my point of view, I would say that I would, because I'm in the live performance location, but I would be interested to hear from some of the people who are not.
I would say, you can hear me right, I am pleasantly surprised that by the time everything's put together and we're all looking at the score and we're working towards the piece, that it feels more like being part of an ensemble than I expected. I expected this process to seem very distant and very sort of strange, and it's way less disconnected than I anticipated. So I'm really enjoying that about it.
Anyone else?
I'd agree with that. I've actually, bizarrely enough, I have the nice little card of the one that's furthest away. But it was really quite cool to sort of see the score and play and know that someone else was playing, even though I couldn't necessarily hear them through my computer because my computer doesn't do that. But I still sort of felt like I was playing in a group, which was really kind of cool, and didn't feel like it was just me all on my own with 5 random bizarre people elsewhere in the world.
Something that we didn't cover in the intro, sorry, I have to turn myself off because I talk in my own ears when I speak. Everybody is actually following a score which has been sent to them live, controlled by me, using software that is set up to allow people to share something as a watching experience. It's actually called Watch Party, and the idea behind the software is that if people were watching a show together and something amazing happened, the person with the controls can pause it for everybody and you can all jump online and have a conversation about that. And I'm sending that score visually out to people, which for the benefit of people who are up on the tech, that is exported from the Sibelius score, full score, with the performer tracks muted, and made into a video which is hosted on YouTube and played to the performers by Watch Party.
Made perfect sense. We've got another question here. With the improvisational quality of it, I'm curious whether it went to plan or whether there is a degree of serendipity and responding to any delays. It worked really nicely. I'm just curious.
Go on, someone else can say things that's not me.
I felt like that was the best that I've played, the most interesting that I've played, the parts that I improvised. That's just my 2 pence worth. I think the added pressure that you're all here watching us helps. But like, I think there's enough room for the composed elements, and I felt like I had enough room to play stuff, because some of my stuff is also in the track as well, because it was just extra complicated to try and do all that live. And the right amount of room to do some improvisation. So for me, it was a win. How was it for everyone else?
I had some added help because my kitten started chewing one of my controllers as we were playing. She's now having a bit of a nap. But this one here was chewing the controller. So yeah, so we had some feline improvisation happening as well from my end.
That was the next question, actually. Somebody says, did Amble's cat enjoy it? That's the next question.
Well, I don't know if chewing counts as collaborating or attacking, so I don't know, but she's asleep and purring now, so whatever happened, she's currently enjoying herself.
If anybody happened to be curious about what we're all actually looking at, it's a really quite complicated score, because people have got some bits that I'd composed in and I'd asked them to play specifically that, and they've got some bits which are pre-recorded in from sessions, and they've got some bits which are automated because they're the track. And I've got some bits where I've just written some chords and said, play some stuff here, go and improvise. So it's that complexity as well, if anybody was curious about how the score was set up.
I actually loved that bit, actually, throughout the whole process of like rehearsing it. Claire always kept saying, don't play it quite so much that's on the piece of music. Make it up.
Yes.
Because I usually hate improvisation, because I remember from school where it was sort of like, here's an empty blank page, make something. And you're like, ugh. And this time I got chords, I could do stuff, and I was like, oh, I have information that I can deal with. And I'm not just sort of like thrown into the deep end, which I really liked. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that may have been a challenge as well at some points, to try and sort of overcome some of the shortcomings of the latency, the delay that can creep in with this software. It's not a lot of delay. It's really not a great deal, but yeah, the delay can creep into it a little bit. And my style of music when I'm composing is always a bit, please don't play exactly what I've written. So some of the challenge was actually, can we get you to not play what's in front of you, which is interesting. So when we had that sort of trying to knock things off the timing, actually, rather than trying to bring things onto the timing, was more of a challenge, I feel. So we must have really felt like that there was a grounding in the timing.
Just to echo what Matthew said about that, like for me, that's really, like in practical terms, that's really helpful, because this is the second project that I've done where I'm using Mimu gloves, but I'm playing a score that someone's composed, and lots of things are written that like don't necessarily lend themselves well to gesture. So for Claire to give us that freedom of like, because I was like, oh wow, okay, I think I can do this, but this is difficult to do with gesture. But Claire was very much like, no, don't play exact. You feel it out, you interpret it in what makes sense with your instrument. So having that freedom was really helpful, because I think it arrived at a place that there was a moment in rehearsal when it went, oh, this is what it's going to be, and it made sense as a gestural thing, because it's very abstract, because there's no, the dots on the page don't tell you anything about what you're going to play. I still have to train the gloves to be something, because there aren't any. When you sit to the piano, middle C is always where you left it. There is none of that framework exists with the gloves. Any gesture, any movement could be any note. So you have to make a lot of decisions about how that's going to work. So I felt that part of it has been really interesting.
That's actually something that's interesting with my instrument as well, that people who are not familiar with thumb jam, is the notes can move. And again, as Chris was saying, middle C is not exactly where you left it, because it depends on what key you've actually set the iPad into. I don't know if anybody noticed that I was making changes and everything that was on the screen kept changing to different references. So the improvisation element kind of does need to be there, but I wanted that running theme as well of something that's happening through the piece.
Okay, we've got another question. Somebody wants to know, do you think it would be possible to use this process in an outdoor context with a mobile, for example?
Not with a mobile specifically, just because I don't know how technical anybody is who's watching this, but an LTE mobile connection tends to have shared ports and rolling ports and all sorts of things. If you are technical, we are a peer-to-peer connection on a UDP port that in some circumstances requires a port forward, which you can't do to a mobile connection, if that helps with that question. So it's not the outdoory, indooriness of it, it's the fact that we need to make that peer-to-peer with a port forward. If you can get peer-to-peer port forward, yes.
Sure, for those who understand that, that made a lot of sense. For everyone else,
yes,
it'll just be like, oh.
Everyone else is just nodding and smiling, going,
LTE,
yeah,
LTE,
great,
yes.
yeah, peer-to-peer, lovely, yeah,
I definitely, I heard Leslie and Claire talking a lot about ports and having to call people, and so finding the right.
Yeah, not
port
the wine, not the wine, an actual port
drives you to it. There's another question here. I'm curious whether you could add a pathway to show the score or show some form of interpretation for a deaf audience. It's not something I know about, it says in the question. So I don't know if you've thought about that, whether you could show the score on the screen.
I also have worked with software that translates MIDI signals into visual instructions as well. So the same item that comes out, I don't know what is a good representation for a deaf audience. We would have to look into that a bit more, because yes, we could make a MIDI representation, those little bars that you get if anybody's familiar with those in the software, and it shows you that there's a note here and then it stops, and there's a note here and then it stops, there's a note here and it stops, but that's a bit on the boring side. That's easy. What you can also do is plug it into something like a Jython program, and each time somebody hits a particular note, it can do a visual in a particular size and colour. It's basically the computer's getting the instructions to do a thing, and that thing can be whatever you want it to be. It can be play music, but it can equally be bring up a slideshow. It can be explode this circle.
Just as a random question, because I'm not the technical one in the group. That's why I'm playing the violin. Would it be possible to get the computer to vibrate in different intensities? Because for a deaf audience, it's less about the fact that they can see all these notes moving around, because they don't know what to do with that. They will be able to deal with the vibration that goes with that note. And so if they've never seen a score before in their lives, they'll be like, oh, look, it's moving pictures, lovely. And I think they would have more from a vibration at the frequency of middle C or F or whatever, and whether or not that would be possible.
Yeah, I can't see any reason why you couldn't program the MIDI data to do whatever you want it to do, because at the end of the day, it's a text instruction that says note number 110, go, until I say stop. Oh, note number 110, stop. So you just line it up.
You could definitely take that data and put it into a PD patch and out through an Arduino to like haptic vibration motors. So you could make a whole kind of haptic set of, you know, like a piece of fabric with lots of different vibration motors in it, and each motor would vibrate at a different speed depending on what data was being put into PD. So there's connections you can definitely take from any computer data and put it through PD, which is pure data, and then connect that to an Arduino to make vibrations. But you'd need somebody to kind of wire it all up and program it, and then you'd have to have one for each person who wanted it. But yeah, there's what's she called? Lucy Hernandez is a textile artist, and she works a lot with haptic feedback. So she makes kind of blankets that vibrate alongside music and stuff like that. So there's Lucie, and then Hernandez is Hernandez, and she did her PhD at Falmouth. So it might be worth looking her up if you're interested in vibration blankets that make funny things that go along with audio and stuff like that.
Great. Something that I didn't say is that making this connection work at its most basic level is incredibly simple. It's just doing what we've done that is much more complicated. In terms of getting two people to download the software, plug in a MIDI keyboard, and you each play each other's keyboard and they make their sound out of the keyboards is very, very simple. That was stage one that we did. I logged into Matthew's piano in Berlin and went blinkety blunk on mine, and it came out through Matthew's piano. In fact, one amusing story is that I was connected up to Chris, and Chris went away to go and do something else and left his connection open, and I'm playing away oblivious on my piano at my end, and Chris is, why is my studio playing music?
I'm beginning to wonder if my studio might have been haunted just for a moment now. I was like, where is that music coming from?
Where's Yvette Fielding when you need her?
Yeah, right.
We've got another question. This is for Chris. Chris's Magic gloves sound a bit like his Telecaster. What would he have to do to make them sound like a Fender bass?
That's a good question, because it's something I do a lot and it's surprisingly simple. So I use a Fender Precision bass, massive air quotes because I don't literally carry one around me, it's samples in the gloves. I actually use a product usually called Scarby, which is it's a kind of interesting story. The guy, Scarby, who made these bass software instruments, he actually has a profound case of RSI and carpal tunnel syndrome. So he's a session bass player who couldn't play because of hand issues, and invented this software to overcome it so he could still deliver the parts that sounded like, you know, the bass. But because of his hand impairment, he couldn't go and literally play a bass in the session. Then I use that software, but I just trigger it via the gloves. So that's what I normally do, and I actually do use a Fender Precision patch in pretty much all my songs. Maybe I should be more adventurous with my bass sounds, but it's that easy. The gloves don't have any inherent sound. They're just sending MIDI data, and then it's the quality of the sound is the clever part. Actually, what's interesting is I don't know what it sounds like at your end. I have my own sort of Telecaster-y patch set up here, but that's not what you've heard. That's only for me to hear. So if it sounds Telecaster-y, that's good, as you might have noticed. I'm a fan of the Telecasters. There's a couple on the wall right there.
Got time for another question, Claire?
Yep.
There's one about the software. So it's a pretty complicated set of pathways. Did you have to piece all that together? If so, wow. And then some of it is open source, some of it commercial. What is the cost and hence the accessibility in a different sense? So are you aware of a free solution? So I suppose it's a question about, you know, if people wanted to replicate this way of working, is it prohibitively expensive?
Okay. The Internet MIDI can be done as a trial version for not for an unlimited period, for 30 activations of 15 minutes each. I think it is around $40 for a permanent license. So it's, you know, and especially in the grand scheme of things that they usually charge you for accessible technology, it's not expensive. The sounds you could pull from another place. We happen to use Ableton for lots of reasons. We tried some other things. We tried it where I was on different software from Chris, and we had some very peculiar results because we would play something together and I'd record it and Chris would record it, and what we got was not similar. I was using Studio One 5 and Chris was recording in Ableton, and for whatever reason the results didn't come out the same. So I think whatever people have should probably be the same at each end. But again, as I said, you don't have to have a software program to interpret the MIDI data, so long as the instrument the person is playing has a sound of its own, which some do and some don't, depending on their input. Chris is playing something that has no sound of its own, but if you were playing a keyboard that had a MIDI connection into it, somewhere I have some fun little videos of my light up keyboard with Matthew playing the keyboard, and you could see all the notes come up on the actual keyboard and the sound coming out. So whatever sound you have access to, you can use. You don't have to get loads of expensive tech. It's just kind of the direction that we ended up going in for a number of reasons to do with just when we were rehearsing together, it started to get a bit bitty, and because you actually can only make the connection peer-to-peer, one peer to one peer. As we getting opened up to being able to be in the same room with other people, you can connect several people together in one location and several people together in the other location. Peer-to-peer connection, different MIDI channel for each person, different MIDI channel for each person, produce the music and share it that way. So the only software that's actually essential in doing what we just did is the Time Warp Internet MIDI, and some way of getting the data from Time Warp Internet MIDI to somewhere else, which on Windows was a very small open source download. I'll let someone talk about what they did on a Mac in a minute, because I don't know. And there is also a free program that does something similar to this, but it's much less user-friendly to just send to someone and say, set this up and we'll have a jam. It doesn't share that visual that we had of the piano and the keys actually happening so that you can more easily enjoy a duet. It doesn't let you import a MIDI file in so that it can play it to the other person, and you have a play along with that. So you can do it with RTP MIDI, but it's much more tech and much more complicated for people to just get on board and do it. Does somebody want to tell me how they got sound into a Mac?
The Mac version is actually really simple, because you have a thing built into Mac OS X called the IAC, Inter-App Connectivity. So if any Mac users who use MIDI should be familiar with that. So I'm running everything via the IAC driver in Mac OS X. So no extra stuff that I need. I can just plug Time Warp straight into Ableton, etc., and plug my gloves. When I say plug, I mean virtually, as in through the operating system. No additional stuff happening. The bit you need is built into the Mac, thankfully. The easier the better for me, frankly. The less stuff I need, the better.
I think my setup was probably the simplest because I didn't have any sound at my end at all. I've literally got a controller plugging into the Time Warp Internet MIDI, and then the sound came out at Claire's end, and I could just hear it through the Zoom call through rehearsal. So yeah, I had no sound at my end at all. I just had a thing to press that would make sound come out at Claire's end. So yeah, it was like proper low tech option. Yeah, that was the simplest way for me to approach it, I think.
Somebody has asked, well, I'll come back, I'll do this one first. Could you add percussion using the same software?
In theory, the difficulty is that percussion is likely to be more noticeable with any latency. We sort of, the piece that we tried before this, the one that was actually called Apres MIDI, was a lot more dependent on people playing together. It was a bit more beaty. I think it would be a challenge to add live percussion to something and send that data out if you wanted to play alongside it with a beat. However, if you wanted to have a percussion track going in the background with some nice long improvisation over the top, there's no reason why you couldn't.
Or if you had more sort of free percussion, sort of, rain stick and twinkle tankles and, vibraphones and, again, that's just choose a MIDI sound and off you go if you wanted it to be sort of free time. But yeah, if you want a beat, then I guess my way of thinking about that is the only problem would be to have a percussion contra the backing track. So you would either need the person playing the percussion to be on the same computer as the backing track in the same room, or not have a backing track and say, well, only one of us is going to play a beat and it's going to be this person and everyone else is going to be free. As long as you've only got one place holding the beat down, you're fine. As soon as you get two places holding the beat down, you start to get into kind of messy water sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, we've actually got a sort of a variable latency. One of the useful things that the Internet MIDI does, which some other things don't, is in one of the screens you can set up and say, how late can something be before I ignore it? So if sometimes if people have worked with this kind of thing before, sometimes the computer will skip over a lot of data and then it will all arrive and then some horrible noise comes out. Whereas we've got control over that to say, don't stack up a load of data and then deliver it. If it's late, just cut it off completely, which does obviously leave a hole instead, but it's better than the alternatives. So if you are, and the speed at which the data is moving between us is ever changing. So I think it would be quite difficult to have a non-pre-recorded percussive beat that you wanted that to be spot on and continuous and metronomic. But anything that you want to do with percussion that's not that is absolutely fine.
Great. And quite a nice question to sort of finish up with, I think. Any other representations or evolution of this project soon? So what's next?
Well, I would love people to volunteer to do things with me on this soon, but I don't know how quickly the people who've been involved in this project will be running screaming from that. But yes, I'd like to experiment with more distance. I am looking into some connections with people who are further away. And I would like to make more connections at one end through a MIDI mixer now that we can have people who are more in the same room with each other. What would be really quite fascinating is to get a group in one end and a group in the other end and actually produce the performance by... Sorry, someone appeared. Produce the performance at each end live over a speaker system rather than the way that we've done it, where we've collated all the sound in one place and broadcast it out. I think that would be very interesting to share the sound with two live performances of multiple people. And the other thing I definitely want to play with is based on what we were saying about Matthew's video, where the speech and noises that you make in the room and vocalizations can be translated into that MIDI data, and to make something out of that so that we're not just sitting down and writing notes that we want to appear, that we can be a bit more experimental with how that works.
Didn't we have a whole session where you had me swearing into my microphone?
Maybe not.
And I think that's everything from the questions room.
Well, fantastic. So I really want to thank you all for being here tonight. And again, a huge thanks to all the performers, to Matthew, to Sonia, whose material was included tonight, to Chris and Amble, and to Leslie, Invisible Leslie over here, who has operated all the technology for us behind the scenes, and that has been a huge, huge commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
A huge thanks to Drake Music Scotland, who've helped along the way, particularly to creative director Pete Sparks, and to Bas Gentenaar for helping us with some technological things along the way. Thanks again to Creative Scotland for the funding, which has made it all possible. And I do hope that you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again soon.